Welcome to Season 6 of the Photo Ethics Podcast. I'm your host, Savannah Dodd, and I'm the founder of the Photography Ethics Center. Each week, I'll be talking with an accomplished photographer about the ethics of their practice. This episode of the Photo Ethics Podcast is brought to you by Falmouth University, one of the UK's leading creative arts institutions. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that I'm passionate about education, especially education that is accessible. With flexible online learning through Falmouth University, you can study from anywhere, starting in January, May, or September. Join the university that has nurtured the award-winning photographers Justin Carey, who we interviewed in Season 1, and Rehab El-Dalil, who we interviewed in Season 4. Falmouth graduates have been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, and the BBC. If you're passionate about photography and want to refine your practice, Falmouth's specialist photography courses are designed for you. Led by expert academics and industry-savvy tutors, you'll develop your critical thinking and create work that explores powerful themes on a local, national, and international scale. Search Photography at Falmouth to find out more. Today, in episode number 4, we'll be talking with Jai Lennard about opportunity versus access. Jai Lennard grew up in the Bay Area of Northern California with family roots in Texas and Louisiana. He studied at Morehouse College in Atlanta, where he started taking photos more seriously, then London, where he took his first photo course, and finally New York, where he received his BA in photography at the School of Visual Arts. He's lived in Brooklyn ever since. His clients include The Hollywood Reporter, CNN, HBO, New York Times, Warby Parker, Club Monaco, and more. However diverse his work is, the binding element is always the stories his subjects tell: perseverance, triumph, legacy, love, and strength. Aside from shooting editorial and advertising, Jai founded the nonprofit Color Positive, which aims to network Black photographers, stylists, and directors in the editorial and commercial world. As well as promoting artists, Color Positive works as a mentorship program, providing artists in New York City schools to speak and mentor youth. Could we start with you just telling us about the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, definitely. The photography work I do, I think the most concise way to describe it is I'm in entertainment. I do portrait work, and over the years, it's led me to basically be an arm in that industry for helping tell the stories that are being told through film and television. It's a wide variety of stuff. So some days I'm with an actress or an actor on the day of their premiere, and we're doing red carpet. I'm doing portraits at a hotel, and they'll just use it for social. It's just to help them and connect with their fans and the audience who's going to watch the movie. Other times I'm doing editorials for magazines that are with the writers, with the producers, taking a portrait of them, talking about how the movie was made, how the series came to be. And then on the other end, it's, final marketing. So that will be key art posters, supplementary assets that will help promote the movie or a television show itself.
That sounds like it would be really quite fun work and quite dynamic work. I'm sure you get to meet a lot of interesting people.
I do. I love it. I've always thought of myself as a storyteller. I think most people in my field do. But, I grew up in Northern California. I was introduced to film really early and fell in love really early and was around a lot of it. Like a lot of the time when I was growing up, there were a lot of big movies that were shot down the street from me or like on my block. So I just always sort of had a little bit of insight and a lot of love into that. So I think it's funny now that it took me so long to sort of come full circle and now be a part of that industry. But I do love it.
That's interesting. So what was your route into this industry? What were you working with before you got into the entertainment?
Before the entertainment, honestly, it was filling things out. I'll say that, to answer that directly, I think I was just more a bit in the lifestyle world, not realizing kind of what I was focused on, treading water, looking for stories that interested me. When I came to New York to finish college in the arts, I thought I wanted to do fashion. And I love fashion and have a whole different background on that. But quickly found out by working in it that it wasn't really for me. It wasn't fulfilling. There was creative parts that I loved and bureaucratic parts that I hated. So I sort of fell out of that quickly, was assisting other guys who were doing a range of stuff, but I'd say mostly I was attracted and vice versa to the portrait world. I was making work that after that sort of fell into the, for lack of a better, just broad term, civil rights activism, helping other people tell stories. For a handful of years, I had this yearly shoot with the UN where I would show up and grab portraits of people women specifically trying to tell stories from around the world about how to make this world a better place, stories of justice, trying to get stories that matter told and across the page.
I think that's a really interesting trajectory. And I guess I want to know, how do you bring that experience and activism into the work that you're doing in entertainment? Because I'm sure, as you transition through different phases of your career, you're always bringing that experience with you to the next thing.
For me, it's the way that I care. Not only do these topics interest me, but my interest dictates my approach to each project. And I really do love deep diving every project that I accept. I want to know about the people who are involved. I want to know the background on the stories. I want to know about the people who they're telling the stories about. And I always take all that information, digest it, and then say, what energy do I need to bring to add to this project to help push whatever they're already doing. So yeah, I think the care is at the forefront of what I bring from one, not just project to the next, but from coming from that world to entertainment, because it really is all the same thing. It's just at different, points. I think that a lot of the subjects that I used to be more head on with, dealing with actual people, dealing with survivors, dealing with people who are on the ground trying to change the world, those same stories get told in entertainment, The stories sometimes get convoluted, they get extrapolated, they get blown up. Sometimes they're smaller. Everyone wants to tell stories different ways. There's always that point where, they're connected, and I'm trying to find those connections and bring that energy and make those connections for other people on the page when my photos are done.
That's really interesting. And I guess I, don't know very much myself about working in the entertainment industry. It's something quite, I think, foreign to me and quite interesting. But I wonder, how does ethics come in to your work in the entertainment industry? In what ways do maybe ethical dilemmas manifest?
All sorts. I'll say when it comes to that question, I think the first thought is always, is the project just seemingly ethical for me? If I'm being approached about a project, is this a topic that I want to dive into? Should I be telling this story? Especially when it comes to stories about women. And I did a lot of stories about women before getting into entertainment. And I think about that a lot. Should I be the one photographing another woman who is either a survivor or trying to tell stories about other women in this scenario? And it's always case by case for me. I take everything individually. I don't really have blanket answers. I have guidelines for myself, but every project's different. So I think it's really my first forethought is, hey, should I be accepting this job? That's always kind of where I start. And then after I decide to, if the job's for me, should I be doing it? Is this something that's going to excite me? Am I going to get something good from this? Is there room for this project to breathe a little bit? And I say yes, then it's, what is the communication? Ethically, how am I going to sensitively approach what this topic is in the best way possible? And not for myself, but for the people involved. Because, one thing that I do carry with me is that I'm in the service industry. I love being an artist. I love being creative. That's all me for sure. But I definitely approach every project as if I am there to be of service to the people who've asked me to be there.
That's really interesting. And I really like that you included something about, will this project excite me actually in sort of your ethical reasoning? Because I think it's much easier to invest yourself and do the work to tell a story fully or to really engage with a story. It's much easier to do that if you're excited about the work, right? It's much harder to make yourself do that if you really don't care about what the story that you're telling.
Absolutely. I also think that just goes back to what we were saying before, it's that, should I be the one doing this? Because for someone else, they might see all the options in front of them because they have a different experience than me. And I think that's important too. Just because you were offered the job doesn't mean that you should be doing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm aware as well that alongside your creative practice, you've also founded an organization called Color Positive. And I wonder if you could maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I, quote unquote, founded Color Positive in the fall of 2020, right before the pandemic, right? Because pandemic was 2021, I think. And that was a timely scenario. I was sort of exiting that world of activism, especially after being in it for a good 5-6 years, doing all different sorts of projects, having that sort of mentality and focus. A lot of the work that I was already just doing on the side had always been helping younger artists across the board. As a young Black artist who came into the industry in 2005, there was not a lot of access. There was not a lot of support and help for someone like me to just get in. Don't get me wrong, I did have avenues and lines of support, but across the board, I just knew that infrastructure wasn't there. So I've always, from the get-go, turned around and been happy to help other people because I needed that help. There was a moment around 2000, I think, 10, 11 to 2015. There was a really big push for female photographers across the board. I think a lot of other great organizations were created. One of my favorites, Women Photograph, and others like that one that was just making it easier to see who was out there, have that access, and be able to see their work and interact and communicate and hire them. Being someone who I was at that time, being a part of that was a great feeling. It was a great moment. To watch that progress happen was really great. But right after, I turned around and thought to myself, wow, there are so many new female photographers that I'm watching on a weekly basis be published right now, which is awesome. The flip side to that was 9 out of 10 of them were young white women. And I was like, okay, we're not telling diverse stories. I think this is an issue. And I didn't want to just put more energy into that. So I was like, what can I do? So I turned around and was like, I think this is a moment for me particularly to be able to help my own community. And so let me focus on not just women, but just young Black artists right now. And I think that this is going to be important. And so back to what I said, I think it was timely because, again, I was already helping people across the board. But to put that kind of focus in, my background is also in advertising. When I got to New York, I was finishing school, but I was doing tons of internships. And I already was basically an arm for an agency on the West Coast that was sending me to LeBook at that time, 2005, 2008, even to 2010. This is all right before social media. LeBook, which is that great international organization that goes around to different cities, allowing people to congregate at one spot, share agencies, share talent, share connections. I was going there and being asked to go there every year and look for new talent. So I've been looking for talent for a long time. I've been looking at talent, honestly, since I was 19 when I got into the industry. That was just something that I always did for someone else and that I really enjoyed doing, loved cataloging. So this is all kind of leading up to that. So I was like, I can do this. I've already been asked on a monthly basis from different agencies, even though that wasn't my job at that point. Just, hey, I know who you are. I know you're connected. Can you suggest anyone? So I was like, let me get organized is my point. I need to sort of make an infrastructure, a website, just something, a placeholder for people to be able to go to so I'm not just constantly digging through my emails. So I did that. And that was that fall. With my partner, my fiance, and another team, we did some of the branding and just, visuals to help us get started. And then I continued to do the work, which is basically a la carte. I'd like to say it's just these one or two specific things, but ultimately everyone needs different help. And I'll be honest and say, I think the thing that I do the most is counseling. It's just a lot of young artists needing advice, a lot of young artists needing perspective. After that, I do a lot of other things, which is make connections, connect young talent to clients. I have clients reaching out to me a lot who say, hey, we have a project specifically. We need this kind of person. It can be specific. It could be, we're just looking for an artist who does this, but it could be also, hey, we're looking for a trans artist from this city who does this type of work. So yeah, across the board, just trying to help. And that was a great launch. And then the pandemic happened and it really ramped up because everyone was home suddenly. And social media was the only thing we could do. So I watched that community all of a sudden really kind of grow very fast, which was great. It was a great feeling. I definitely wanted to build a community. And so, yeah, not to ramble too much, but that's ultimately what it is. I'm a receiver for requests at so many different levels. But for the most part, I'm counseling and helping young artists understand what their next step is.
I think there's something in the work that you do with Color Positive which really relates to how you answered the previous question about knowing, if you're the right person to do a project, because it's much easier, I would imagine, to understand that you're maybe not best placed to do a project because you know the talent and you know who that project would be great for, so you have more of maybe an awareness of the landscape and who's out there and who can take on these projects and who you'd love to see take on that project. So I think there's something really nice about that bringing together of people that maybe helps you be more reflexive in your own work as well. Does that make sense?
100%. And I couldn't agree more. With that said, I think it's very much puts me in a position of access, like I said before, to be able to be in touch with all these different artists of all ages and ranges who are interested in growing their careers or interested in just connecting with me and understanding who they are better. I become a Cliff Notes, book for a lot of different agencies who don't have the resources or time to appropriately hire, in which they can contact me and be like, hey, we have this type of project. Do you have anyone in mind? Because I've done the work. I've sat down for an hour or 2 hours or several hours or weeks at a time talking to someone, understanding who they are, what their values are, how does that play into the work? All those things that really matter to make a project really sing, that no one will maybe know when they see the final image, but what it took to get there was so important. And I help try to fill in those gaps. And it's become very much an asset for me, not just for the community, but for me as an artist to also just understand who's around me and how people are thinking.
I think that there's a lot in there as well about the hidden work that we do. You're talking about like all of a person's values and the things that drive them that go into their work, but also all of that like wealth of knowledge that you've cultivated sort of behind the scenes and all of that expertise that I think sometimes we forget that is a resource and that has been worked for. Do you know what I mean? And that's something that is of value. It's not just inherent. Does that make sense?
100%. This is a topic that I talk about a lot with rates, especially with younger talent who don't understand how to calculate rates. And I think that's part of a calculation. What am I bringing in my expertise to this project? Years of expertise that is going to save us time, going to save us resources by me knowing these things I already know are not going to work. Just that alone, aside from the other things that I bring to my expertise, just the experience.
Totally. I think there's a lot to that. And I think looking on your website as well, you talk about that role of counseling young artists and you have a page dedicated to mentorship. I guess I wanted to maybe hear more about like the role that mentorship has played for you or the importance of mentorship within the industry as well.
Yeah. I'm trying to think back now, there was some early college. I don't really understand who fully just set this into my brain, but I just kind of always knew I needed a mentor. And I think maybe that's also back to just my background. Growing up as a young Black man in a mostly white community, despite how diverse my area was, I just always knew that if I was going to succeed, I wasn't going to do it on my own. And I don't think really anyone does, but to have that sort of innate relationship and kind of view really projected me into a certain path. So early college, I had mentors that I talked to about business when I started in business and not photography, and then switched into photography and immediately started interning. And, it wasn't always like I was out saying, hey, I'm looking for a mentor, but I treated all those relationships as such. I was always someone who was easily ready to ask questions and learn quickly and really kind of digest that information. So that said, it's just so important to me. It's so important to me. I know how important and how big an impact it makes to have any guidance, especially at an early age. What I was just saying, the experience of trial and error alone brings so much going through those processes. And it's great to be told something works or doesn't work, but when you go through the experience, it's a whole other dynamic. And that's part of mentorship, So yeah, it's been at the forefront of what I do now. And I really enjoy it. It makes me happy. And, it genuinely uplifts my heart to know that I can do this for other artists right now, and knowing that it was something that I wanted when I was coming in.
I think that there's something about both turning down work if you feel like you're not well placed for it, and in, being a bringer together of people and talent and referring people on, and also in that mentorship, which really has to do a lot with this idea of uplifting others and that there is enough, right? There is enough work to go around. And that's something that in a previous episode, I think Danielle Villasana spoke about. This idea of scarcity is really dangerous, right? And it pits us against each other. It makes us feel like we all are competing for this little thing. But actually, the idea of, when you uplift others, that's sort of a net good, I think is sort of bound up in this. Yeah?
Yes, it is. I think especially through the pandemic, everyone got so scared just because the world stopped. I think leading into the pandemic, and that's such a marker that I bring this up a few times in this conversation, but, I think the idea on that scarcity was really, really strong before the pandemic. And then it peaked during, because there was even less work. But I think coming out now, a lot of the conversations I have shifted. I think people are really starting to let go of the fear, which it can be really controlling, and realize when you look around, especially in this field that we're talking about, photography, there is more work exponentially across the board than there ever has been ever. There are so many new clients. There are so many new people. There are so many new websites. There's so many new platforms, and every single one needs an image or visuals to tell their story. Another conversation is money. Rates have gone down because those same clients are spreading themselves thin, trying to entertain us through all those platforms and all those people, right? Gap, as an example, normally a client like that would just do out of home, which is like print media, so posters, billboards, right? And then commercials, small television spots. But now they have to provide content for Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and all three of those platforms alone, aside from several others that I won't even mention, are so specific in the way that you have to format that look. So you're not just creating something and then being like, okay, we're going to crop it and then put it in this. And then we're going to just kind of flip it and then put it in here. Everyone's having to spend more money as well. So that part is very real. But at the same time, there's still work to be had. Tons and tons of work to be had. So I think it's something that I bring up a lot, that yes, everything has grown. The workforce has grown. There's way more photographers now than there ever were, just because of our technology. Everyone's got a camera phone and you can take pretty good pictures. It's pretty amazing. But again, back to the point, I think there's just so much work. And I think people are starting to let go of that scarcity and really see, hey, yeah, I can find my way. It might take a little longer. I might have to really kind of do some digging, but there's definitely a place for me here.
I think that's a really interesting point. And that's something that I really hadn't given much thought to, really, about, the various platforms that these companies are having to cater to, and the way that impacts rates and the way that impacts, I don't know, I think that's really interesting. I don't know if this is wildly off topic, but it makes me think a little bit about something that I think a lot about, and I don't have a lot of solidified thoughts on, but sort of the ethics of viewership and participation also in social media. This ecosystem that images are being produced and consumed in, that is, while it's creating more work, it's also reducing the value of that work and also making it really ephemeral. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I agree. And I think, the way you put it is so succinct, honestly. And I'm actually glad you said it out loud because I've never said it like that. I've always sort of described it as this is the ecosystem and this is what happens. But the devaluing term is really, I think, apt. Yeah, the more content we have, the less we just not only less we value it as an ecosystem that is indulging on the content, but also as clients and owners who are trying to push it out, Yeah, we flip through things so much more quickly now. When the Super Bowl was happening in the early 2000s, those were some of the biggest spots that you could see. There were the most funny commercials and it was the most, widely televised event of the year. But you would just see those commercials during those moments of the event. But now especially this year, it's funny to look at it because now we're getting commercials a week before. We're realizing where our mental capacities are. Are we actually tuning in for the event? Are we tuning in just for the spot? How are we going to get viewership better for the spot? Should it come a week before? Should it come before the game? Is it after? Is it during? We've just completely changed our mind on where everyone's values are and where everyone's attention span, valued attention span is. When and where are we actually paying attention and not just sort of looking and having something up while we're also holding our phone looking at the second screen.
Yeah. I mean, I'm totally guilty of that. I wish I wasn't. I wish I could say I didn't do that. But of course I do. I think I think attention spans have changed. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. They really have.
Dare I ask about AI and how that sort of comes into this ecosystem?
I will preface this by saying, I love technology, but I'm not someone who is deep dived into AI. And I know you can, and I know there's a lot of uses, but I will say as someone who's watching, someone who has used some basic tools, and especially now that some of those tools are we have AI on our Photoshop program right now, right? So it's not like I haven't not used it, So I will say, I think one of the biggest things is back to this part of our earlier conversation, fear, right? I think a lot of the conversation is based around fear right now, especially when it comes to having these internal conversations, people inside the industry who are making work. And maybe I'm an optimist, but I don't have that fear personally. I think a lot of things, it's a tool and we're trying to figure out what we should be using it for and what we shouldn't. And I think there's a healthy amount of pushback right now. And I think it's warranted. We all want help. We all want certain tools to do things more streamlined and easier, but we don't want our jobs taken away. I think there's a thick line there. I think it's one thing to sort of use AI to extend a background, right? I'm shifting pixels over by 10 to extend color. I think it's another thing to completely generate and publish. And I think that's the conversation I have the most, where, not just how are you using it, but where is it going? And how in two different ways. How are you using to create, but how are you using the product after you create? And I think that's really, really important. Communication's huge. Before you get a job, a lot of the times, especially with commercial work as a photographer, you're projecting what you want the final product to be. A client will come to you and say, hey, we have this talent, we have this space, this is what we need, what are your thoughts? And then you have to repurpose a deck and be like, hey, this is what I do, this is what I do best, this is how I think it's going to work for this project. And through that deck that you make for your client, prospective client, while you're bidding, is you share images. Ideally, you have a bank of images. I've been shooting for a while, so I'd say most of the time at this point, I can go back into my archive and pull out images that will give them examples of what we're going to get to. But a lot of the time, especially for the younger talent that we've been talking about for half of this conversation, people coming into the industry, they have to pull swipes. And if you're at an agency, you're not an artist, you're literally just pulling swipes. Swipes being other work to help you communicate the idea, right? So I think when you're creating that work, which is being created every day, every second, every hour, everyone's using this form of visual communication to get to the idea. I think AI is going to be a huge proponent. I think when you're talking about having someone helicopter over a volcano for the cover of Vanity Fair, and you can create something that gets closer to that idea so you can have it on the page and use AI, that's kind of awesome. But to have it as the final product, no. Why? Because you have people to create something that's organic, to have the relationship, to have the experience, all these things that are necessary for it to really sort of come together and be a final product that people are going to not just identify with, but connect with and have, inspire and do all the things that these images do for people when they come out. I think that's really just where the line is for me. Again, a great tool, but what are we doing with the product after we've created with that tool,
I think that's a really useful distinction about sort of the use of it. And as well, I think it makes me think, again, about your work with Color Positive, that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's a database of not just photographers, but people involved throughout the creative process. So there are a lot of people, right, involved in producing an image like that, like the one you described, the helicopter and the volcano, right? Thinking about scarcity and thinking about the role of artists. Like, that isn't just the photographer that gets cut out of that process. It's a whole network of people.
Yes. The art directors, the creative directors, the stylists, the helicopter pilots. It's a whole thing. Everyone's showing up. It's a big deal. We're not trying to cut the industry off by the limbs, We just are looking to have our lives be easier. And so, yeah, I think, back to what we were saying, there's a lot of fear, but I think at the end of the day, we all still want to get outside our house. We all still want to create and do cool things and, and see different things. We don't want to just be sitting on computers creating and publishing work. That's not fun. That's not what the industry was made for.
Is there any one sort of common myth about photography that you would want to debunk?
I got two, but the first one on my mind is being a photographer. I think it's a myth that's not vocalized but thought of, that you are taking pictures all the time. I'd say in this field, you're taking pictures to get a final image, to do a series of images. I'd say you're shooting 20% normally. There's so much prep work. There's so much communication involved. There's so much planning. There's so much editing. There's so much post-production. There's so much retouching. There's so much reorganizing. There's so much in that storytelling process that you need to do to get the images that we want to publish. And I think a lot of people don't realize it until they're in the flow of it. It's just something that I don't think we really talk about a lot. I hope that doesn't sound discouraging. I think it's just a realistic kind of take. When I share it normally, I hope that it allows people to think about how they're supposed to be spending their time.
Yeah. No, I think that's really useful because I think, you mentioned things about the preparatory work, but also the communication. I think that idea of, that is part of our responsibility is to communicate, not just to click the shutter. And I don't know, I guess I wonder, what do you mean when you talk about communication? Because I guess I'm thinking maybe more in, I interview a lot of photojournalists and stuff, documentary photographers who are doing quite a lot of communicating with the people that they're photographing. But I would assume that you also do a lot of communicating with the people actually in the image.
100%. And I think that's just a big part. I think we're talking about the industry, right? I'm not just an artist. So when I say industry, we're talking about there are obviously different components to create an industry that is producing content that is being received by a mass audience. With that context, the communication is so important because you're dealing with so many people. I'm dealing with my editors who are dealing with their art directors, who are dealing with their CDs. And I might even not have any of those conversations, but that's a lot of communication just on its own. While then, just to get to the shoot, I'm communicating with whoever I need to, whether it be talent, whether it be locations, whether it be I'm communicating with just travel, just to get to A to B to C to D, communication on what the story is, the backstory to the story, what's my context for helping tell the story. Communication also on the end of not just vocalizing what we need and where we need to be, but communication on color. What do we want to see? Is this a timeless moment? Do we need it in black and white? Or are we going to communicate something that we want to jump off the page? Something that we want a bit more vibrant? What are those colors? What does a color mean for this specific topic? If we're talking about mental health and we're talking about serenity and looking in, then there are actual colors out there that have history, that have communicated over time what that is. And you can go look them up, and different colors communicate different things. There's all sorts of ways that we like dive into the communication aspect. And so, yeah, it's heavy, and I bring it up a lot.
I absolutely love that, because I think that that's really important for photographers to be aware of, regardless of their genre. Not just if you're doing like art directed scenes, but also if we're doing social documentary work, thinking about what are the colors communicating, because those will still communicate with the audience, regardless of if you have intentionally selected them. I think that idea of visual communication is so huge, so huge.
Yeah, it really is. So important. And we have to think about it a lot. And I think that's also part of the process.
Did you have a second myth that you wanted to flag before I moved on?
Something else I talk about a lot, I was going to say, is I think there's a huge myth that we only need opportunities. I think there's a lot of young artists out there who think if I just got the opportunity, I would kill it. I would get it done and it would be awesome and like next thing. I think that's such a huge myth on what it means to succeed, quote unquote, because, that's different for everyone. I will interject that with having an opportunity is amazing, but having an opportunity without access is devastating. Something I talk about a lot is opportunity versus access, and also with access. You can be asked to do a job that sounds amazing, and when you get there, you have not been set up to succeed. And that is the difference between having access and not having access. So when I say access, what I'm talking about is the editor or the team or the magazine or the client, the movie, the documentary film production, did they just send you there? Did they just say show up? Or did they say, hey, you have this opportunity we'd like for you to explore, to get these images, get this video, and we've set you up with a local producer. We've given you full access to this location. Your support is hair and makeup and clothing. You are going to have the time that you need to prep and get there and arrive with the team that you want, that you've chosen to do the job. That's an ideal scenario. But a lot of the times it's not opportunity with access. Access also can't always be given freely, right? We have to negotiate access a lot. A lot of times you're sent somewhere, whether it's travel or just down the street into the city, whatever, local, where you arrive and people are confused. And you're not sure what entrance to even come into because they didn't check which one, right? You have equipment and you weren't supposed to go into the front door, you're supposed to go around the back. That just wasted you 35 minutes on an hour and a half that you were supposed to have to set up. That's not access, right? That's not setting you up to succeed. In other moments, it's access to the talent, right? Sometimes you're connected with the talent before the shoot. This helps build rapport, right? This helps you ease in so that the second you see the talent, especially if you only have 15 minutes with them, that you're like, okay, cool. This is going to be really quick and easy to get comfortable, sit down. We've already talked. That's access too. There's so many different types of access. An opportunity is just an opportunity. And without access, it's not a lot. And I think even editors need to be reminded this too. Editors are hiring and thinking, oh, I just got the perfect photographer that I wanted for this, but they didn't set them up. And they need to be reminded that that is part of what they do, I
think that's a great distinction. And I think maybe it's also something that photographers can think about, what do they have the right to ask for, right? I think sometimes we don't know what we should be asking for. And so I think that's a really good reminder.
Yeah, definitely.
The last question that I like to ask everyone who comes on the podcast is, what does photography ethics mean to you?
I guess photography ethics for me is about putting the well-being of everyone who's involved at the forefront of your mind when you do a project. When it's there, you're protective of it. And I think that photography ethics is about being protective to what's important on every scenario. And it may seem like a lot of times the most important thing is just to get it, but it's usually not. For me, a lot of times it's about the experience. When I focus on the experience as the most important thing for a photography project, a lot of other things come into play very smoothly, including the images. When I'm just focused on the end result, a lot of things can fall apart. Photography ethics for me is about putting the well-being of everyone at hand at the forefront of your mind.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Photo Ethics Podcast. The aim of this podcast is to share new insights about photography ethics with others. So if you heard something you liked, please share this podcast with someone who would appreciate it. You can also rate and review us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. This episode of the Photo Ethics Podcast is sponsored by Falmouth University, one of the UK's leading creative arts universities. In a world where images shape narratives, ethical photography has never been more important. At Falmouth University, the online photography MA helps you master your craft while exploring the responsibilities of visual storytelling. Learn from industry experts, challenge conventions, and develop work with integrity, all from almost anywhere in the world. Join a global community of photographers committed to making a difference. Search Falmouth online and book a call with a course advisor today. Join me next week when we hear from Ernest Davis on empathy in the darkroom.